In this chapter, we are going to be putting our supply and demand curves together and looking at the concept of equilibrium. So before we actually put those curves together, let's talk a little bit about what equilibrium is. So we're not going to get too deep into it, especially the meaning for economics right now. We're going to wait until we get those supply and demand curves together. But just for a working definition of equilibrium, right, this is a state in which opposing forces or influences are balanced. So this is a little bit more like a kind of a natural science or a hard science definition of equilibrium, but it does serve to kind of show us what we're looking at, right? And it also kind of gives us an idea about some of the main concepts that go along with it, right? So we have opposing forces, right? When those forces are balanced, that's where we have equilibrium, right? Now, for us, those opposing forces are going to be kind of supply and demand, right? In another kind of more hard science application, we can think, let's say that we had kind of a U-shaped kind of half pipe type thing, right? And we took a metal ball, right, set it on the edge of one side and then hit it, right? It's going to go down, probably go up, and keep kind of doing this for a while until the opposing forces of gravity and the energy it got from kind of doing that initial drop, right, are balanced, and that ball rests at the kind of bottom of that half pipe, right? And that's really what we're looking at here as well, right? We're not going to, when we are looking at the graphs, which we will do in just a second, we are looking at snapshots of a market. So snapshots of supply and demand, right? Then we're going to introduce something, all right, a shock, right, similar to the shocks that we looked at in chapter 3, right, for supply and demand, right? Then we're going to be talking about how that shock affects the system, all right? But one important thing to note is that in reality, right, well, again, these are teaching tools, right? These graphs that were, these models that we're going to be looking at, these are teaching tools, right? They don't always reflect reality to the most extreme extent, right? We're going to be looking at things in a very static way, right? Again, kind of that idea of the snapshots. We're taking a picture of this, looking at it, changing one thing, right, and then looking at it again, right? In reality, that's not really how it works, right? You're never going to get a supply and demand chart that accurately, right, or perfectly matches reality, because supply and demand, those things are kind of shifting constantly, all right, in very small ways, right? And so that we are never actually going to reach equilibrium, but we are always going to be moving towards equilibrium, all right? So that is an important thing to note when we are talking about equilibrium. Just conceptually to know what it is we're looking at, and then also to just understand what we're actually doing with these graphs. Right? Again, these graphs are not showing kind of, these are the movements to equilibrium, right? And even though we say there's a new equilibrium, technically things would probably move before we were able to fix that, all right? But again, you'll see kind of what we're going to do, and we'll talk about it more as we go. All right, so let's just go ahead and pop a graph up here. All right, as always, we want to notate our price and quantity, all right, our axes. Then we will get our supply and demand. Right, where our supply and demand curves intersect, that is our equilibrium. All right, so we're going to notate our equilibrium price with P star, our equilibrium quantity with Q star. Once we have that supply and demand curve up there, we see where they intersect. Again, we're going to see where we have our equilibrium, right, telling us the price and quantity, right, that's going to clear the market, right? All right. So in other words, at equilibrium, right, in this model, right, at a price of P star, right, Q star, kind of the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are both going to equal Q star, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that probably in a different video, but continuing to talk about kind of equilibrium. So we said that we have two opposing forces, right? And now you might think, well, they kind of are supply and demand. Those are kind of our opposing forces. Where those forces meet, right, we're going to get our equilibrium. But there's also this kind of idea of that really kind of sets consumers and producers at odds with each other, right? So consumers are wanting to get, you can kind of think, they're wanting to get a good for the lowest price. Producers are wanting to sell their good for the highest price, right? However, really, consumers and producers aren't competing with each other, right? They have the same goals in mind, right? I want you to make something so I can buy it, or I want to make something so you can buy it, right? Really very similar goals, right? Who's really competing in supply and demand is producers are competing with each other, right, to supply a good for the lowest price, and consumers are competing with each other, right, to kind of buy the good, right, and one of the ways that they're going to do that is by offering a higher and higher price, right? If I want a good really badly, right, I'm going to offer a higher price for it. Right. Looking at our graph, we can see elements of this. Right. So when we're looking at this graph, right, kind of everything to the right of our equilibrium, right, these are kind of the people who lost. All right. So for this section of supply, right, this represents all the non-sellers, right? Everyone, right, in this portion of the supply curve, right, would have needed kind of a higher price to supply more of this good, right? And so if we don't get to it, right, these units are not being sold, right, because the price isn't high enough, right, because producers have competed with each other, right, to lower that price, right? I will sell it for $1. Somebody else comes in and says, I'll sell it for 95 cents, right, so on and so forth, all right? And these producers are left out in the cold in that scenario, right? Similar thing happens with the demand curve to the right of our equilibrium, right? These are the non-buyers. All right, so these are individuals for who, or for whom, I suppose, for whom the price was too high, right, and they were either kind of unwilling or unable to buy the good at that price, right? So in other words, these buyers have been outbid for this good by other buyers, right? Then we can continue on the same kind of track. Look, oop, that's not how you do that. That's close enough. All right. on the other side, kind of very similar, so I'm just going to go ahead and put both of these up, right? For our supply curve, right, to the left of our equilibrium, right? For these sellers, they were able to actually sell their product, right? They were willing to sell their good at a low enough price that they were to kind of outcompete the other producers, right? And have consumers choose their goods kind of first, right? This section of our demand curve represents those buyers who were able to outbid other buyers, right? And so we're able to get that good. Right, so really that's kind of a lot of stuff going on with equilibrium. Again, a lot of opposing forces, right? Kind of this competition between our buyers and non-buyers, between our sellers and not, they're really just all sellers and all buyers. That's where the competition is. After the competition, that's where we see them broken into these buyer and non-buyer, seller and non-seller distinctions. All right, I think that's kind of where we're going to. That's just that's just the very brief introduction of the concepts of equilibrium. Right, when we have our where our curves intersect, that's where we're going to get our equilibrium. Right, equilibrium price is P star. Equilibrium quantity is Q star. Right, and then of course we've got that competition between buyers, right? Competition amongst buyers is maybe a better way to say that, and competition amongst sellers. The buyers trying to outbid, right, other buyers, right, for goods that they want. Sellers trying to kind of undercut other sellers, right, or just price their goods so that they're more attractive to consumers, right, rather than the goods of some of the other producers. All right, we're going to continue talking about some of the similar things, especially this kind of idea of competition between buyers and competition among buyers, competition among sellers, right, in the next video. All right, but I will see you then.